Uncle Garge was an old fisherman. He certainly didn't know much about the game of golf. It was quite a few years ago, and he retired from his hometown of Twillingate and went off to Toronto. And he's laying around the house, and he'd remembered that him and Martha had been married 50 years. And he's carrying on about wanting to be out in his old punt and wanting to do something back home, and he didn't have anything to do. Remembering they were married 50 years, he said, "Martha," he says, "I'm proud of you." Martha is hard of hearing. She says, "What's that you say, Garge?" He said, "I'm proud of you." She says, "Yes, and I'm tired of you, too." She said, "Garge, why don't you find something to do? Why don't you take up that game they call golf?" And he said, "What's that?" And she said, "That's a game where you chase a ball all over the country when you're too old to chase women." "Okay," he says, "I'll go and see if somebody will teach me." So Garge goes down to Jones, the golf pro. He said, "Jones," he said, "would you teach me how to play this game called golf?" Jones said, "Sure, I'll teach you." He says, "You got balls?" "Yes," Garge said, "I have, but sometimes on a cold morning they're kind of hard to find." "Well, tomorrow morning," Jones said, "you'll be down at the clubhouse and we're going to tee off." Garge said, "Tee off? What's that?" And Jones said, "That's a golf term we use, and we got to tee off in front of the clubhouse." Garge said, "No, sir, not me." He said, "You can tee off there if you want to, but I'll tee off behind the barn somewhere." No, Jones says, "A tee is the thing the size of your little finger." Garge said, "Yes, I got one of those." "Well," Jones says, "you stick it in the ground and you put your ball on top of it." Garge says, "Oh, you're sitting down when you're playing golf, are you?" "I always thought you stood up and walked around." "Well," Jones says, "you are standing up when you put your ball on the tee." Garge says, "Don't you think that's stretching things a little bit?" And now, says Jones, he said, "Do you know how to hold your club?" And Garge said, "After 50 years, I got some sort of an idea." Well, Jones says, "You hold it in both hands." Hold it, boy, hold it," Garge said. "That's not me you're talking to." And then Jones said, "You swing it over your shoulder." And Garge said, "No, that's my brother you're talking about." Now he said, "Garge, you got a bag, didn't you?" He says, "Yes, I have." He said, "Your balls are in it?" "Yes," he said. Well, he said, "Would you mind opening your bag and taking out one of your balls?" And Garge said, "I suppose I could, but damned if I'm going to try." And Jones says, "What's the matter? Don't your bag have a zipper on it?" And Garge said, "No, mine is the old-fashioned type." Now he said, "Garge, by the way," he says, "how do you hold your club?" And Garge said, "In two fingers." Jones said, No, he said, "That's not right." He says, "Come here and I'll show you." So Jones gets his arms around old Garge, and he's got him bent over there, teaching him how to hold the club. And old Garge turns around and he says, "Get me the hell out of here, man. I didn't spend 4 years in the Navy for nothing." Now, Jones said, "Garge, you hit that ball and it'll soar and soar." And Garge said, "Yes, I can well imagine." Now, says Jones, "you go down the green." Garge said, "What's the green?" And Jones said, "That's where the hole is." And Garge said, "Are you sure you're not colorblind?" Now, said Jones, "You take the putter." And Garge said, "What's the putter?" And Jones said, "That's the smallest club made." Garge said, "Yes, I got one of those." Now he said, "You take the putter and you put the ball in the hole." And Garge says, "Don't you mean to say that you put the club in the hole?" No, Jones says, "The hole ain't big enough for the ball, the club, and the putter all at once." "Go on," Garge said, "I seen holes big enough for a horse and buggy." Now, says Jones, "You hit that ball," he said, "to the number 1 hole, and you go on to the next 17. Hold it. Boy, he says, "You're not talking to me, because I'm shot to hell after 2 holes. And Jones says, "You mean to say that you can't make 18 holes in one day?" George said, hell, man, it takes me 18 days to make one hole. Besides, says George, how do I know when I get to the 18th hole? Well, Jones said, boy, the red flag will be up. And George said, ain't that just my luck?